USA History Guy talking about the French and Indian War today. What is it? The French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, if you ask Europeans what it was called, was a battle between the English and the French in the 18th century that spilled over into North America. It was the battle royale, once and for all, for which great European power would claim the prize of international leader. So England and France fought on New England and New France, which is the area of the North Atlantic, up here in America and New England, into Canada, over towards the Atlantic Ocean, the valuable fishing and fur trading industry, also known as fur trading industries. Here's the basics. In 1754, a number of delegates with French, English, and Indian interests met in New York to try to figure out how to take care of the landlocked tensions of this new world. Ben Franklin proposed what has become known as the Albany Plan of Union, which a lot of people liked at first, and it was supposed to help bring peace and everybody would have their own space, but it was never adopted by the British. The British felt hemmed in. They were between the Mississippi River and the Atlantic Ocean. The French had a dominant system of forts all along the rivers. Rule Britannia, rule the waves, Britons ne'er will be slaves. As they were talking in 1754, young George Washington, working for the British, was already off from Virginia, running into skirmishes in southwestern Pennsylvania. He got into a bit of a jam, and his men had to hurriedly build a fort. It became known as Fort Necessity, but they couldn't hold out forever, and the French eventually took them out. There were three key areas up for grabs in the French and Indian War. The North Atlantic coast, going up north towards what the British eventually called Nova Scotia, home of Sidney Crosby, eh? The border region between New England and New France, which ran around, well, the Niagara Falls area is the most famous part where these battles would be fought. And then there's the western frontier, which really at the time was the Ohio River. From Lake Erie down to Pittsburgh, where the forks of the Ohio River met, today we call it the Three Rivers, or the confluence of the Three Rivers, that was really the stage for many of these key battles. The French dominated the waterways, and they had built a fort right in Pittsburgh at the Point. Today it's Point State Park. They had called their fort Fort Duquesne. There were plenty of Indian tribes involved as well, most notably the Huron and the Iroquois, the Delaware. They had their interests as well, and it suited them to have multiple European powers in order to play one against the other. The war unfolded in two basic parts. The first part was the French kicking butt, the second part was the British winning. In 1755, the British sent over a legendary general named Edward Braddock. He arrived in the New World, and he blew off advice from people like George Washington and Ben Franklin, who said, you might not want to battle the way you did in England over here. What those men knew was that it was a new style of warfare taking place here on the continent of North America. Braddock figured that they were no one to advise him. He blew off the advice and promptly marched up towards Pittsburgh, and eventually would meet his doom. Poor General Braddock was killed, along with every single one of his officers, I believe. Only George Washington, bullet holes right through his coat, survived. Washington realized he was the field commander, and he told everybody to get under cover. No more of this European style of engagement where you stand in the open in a bright freaking red coat where there's ambush fire coming from the woods. As they retreated, they buried Braddock's body in the road and trampled all of their horses and men over it. This was not a sign of disrespect, it was a practical measure because the Indians did want to collect their prize, their treasures, their scalps, and this would prevent the body of the general from being dug up or found. And through 1756, the British got just killed, literally, and finally in 1757, a new prime minister was elected. His name was William Pitt, and William Pitt's an important guy. He would take the country in a new direction. He said, I alone can win this war, and he invested a number of troops and money into the cause. Not only did Pitt send in about 20,000 new troops, he had negotiations with the Indians to basically hear their grievances, and whether or not they lived up to the promises they made, they got the Indian support back that they needed. Before too long, Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh was recaptured and renamed. It was called Fort Pitt in honor of the Prime Minister, and so I live in the city of Pittsburgh. With the tide of the war changed, by 1759 the British pushed on up north. They went into the frontier, up through New France, into Canada and Montreal, home of Mario Lemieux. Eventually the war came to a close in the early 1760s and the Treaty of Paris was signed. As a result of the Treaty of Paris, the French lost all of their claims on the North American mainland and they ceded the lands east of the Mississippi as well. There was also the matter of French Louisiana and New Orleans, which actually went to the Spanish. For their part, the Spanish were given all Caribbean colonies, like Cuba, and they actually, in return, gave Florida to England. So Florida ping-pongs around in history. This is the beginning of it becoming a future American possession. Most importantly, the stage was set for the American Revolution. Now it would be a matter of the colonists taking on England, and the French were now out of the picture. I love to hear your questions and comments, so please leave those below and subscribe for more videos from USA History Vlog.